Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to this morning's Infrastructure Committee meeting. We have a quorum, and apologies for the delay. I understand that a number of folk have been caught some traffic as well, so they will be coming later. Today we will be considering some subordinate legislation. We'll be receiving a departmental briefing on the budget for June monitoring, and a further briefing from the Department on commercial bus service permits and transport integration. Obviously we're old hands at this now, but can I just remind those members who are joining us remotely to raise their hand via the icon to register if they wish to ask questions at each agenda item, and also to mute their mics as this may cause some interference during the evidence session. Also remind you, and I'm conscious that we are opening a little late, that we do need to vacate this room at noon, so if you can bear that in mind as we go through both of our briefings. At this point I have apologies from the Deputy Chair David Hilditch, from Dolores Kelly and from Keith Buchanan, but I understand that they will all be joining us at some stage during the meeting. I don't have any chair's business, so if we move on then to the draft minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of June, and you will find those at page 6. Are members content? Miss Anderson and Mr. Muir. Mr. Muir?
Chair. Yes, thank you. Just we're on draft minutes, but previously the item before was chairperson's business, and I'm also very conscious that this is probably your last committee meeting, and you will be departing us onto pastures new as minister. I'm just to congratulate you on that appointment and say that I've enjoyed working with you over the 17 months as chair of the committee. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Anderson.
Same here, Chair. Despite our political differences, I think you've been a very good chair and you've treated us all fairly. So well done and good luck going forward.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. Moving on then to, can I assume that we've agreed the draft minutes?
Can I also just get a brief chance to thank you for your role as chairperson. Again, I always thought I get called appropriately, and thank you for chairing the committee in a very fair and equitable way.
Okay, well, no, I very much appreciate that, and I suppose I was going to say something just at the end,
Okay.
just to obviously thank the committee members as well, but we'll maybe reserve that maybe to the end of the meeting, but thank you for those comments at this juncture.
Chair, can I come in as well, just to share and concur with some of the comments? I mean, you've been very, very fair with everybody in the committee, and I just wish you good luck in your new post.
Great, thank you. And I maybe on the back of that, maybe I hope then that you'll not give me too hard a time then when I take up my new role. You'll bear that in mind for the future months. So, but thank you very much for those comments. So draft minutes, are we agreed? Yes. Okay, thank you. Matters arising at page 15, and again that's from the meeting of the 2nd of June. Any issues that members wish to raise at this point? Nope. Okay, and at page 18 we have outstanding committee requests for information, and obviously the various attempts which have been made to follow up on those items as well. Perhaps it might be something that we may want to look at with regards to whether or not time has passed sufficiently now that maybe we don't need to have those maybe on our list, but or if the issues have been resolved. But if members are content that we leave that maybe to Vincent and Alison maybe to look at as well, if members are content to do that. Okay, moving then to correspondence, item 5, just draw your attention to the correspondence memo at page 26, and obviously the advisory note with suggested action for members to take on those. I just draw your attention to the correspondence from the PAC, which is the report on driver and vehicle agency, and you will know that this was an issue in relation to the lifts. The DVA are briefing the committee next week on the resumption of MOTs and driving tests, and I suppose I would propose that they come and provide a second briefing on their response to the findings and recommendations on the report, if members are content to do that. Mr. Boylan.
Yes, Chair, I could concur with that. I was just checking to see exactly, because clearly, well, obviously some of us on this committee is on the PAC, and we've seen some very damning reports. So, I mean, at the earliest possible, if they can respond next week, that would be appropriate if they can. I mean, we need to find out exactly how they're going to react in terms of recommendations of that report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Members content with that. At page...
Chair, if I might.
Yes, Mr. Beggs.
I had raised my hand. I think we do need to be careful here, because the department has a stipulated time period to formally respond to those recommendations through the memorandum of understanding that exists with the Public Accounts Committee. So we need to make sure we don't get into that process. Certainly, there's no harm if we get an update, but I just think we do need to check what the correct protocol is, given that the PAC has primacy on this.
Okay, if members are content, then if we can leave that with Vincent and Alison to check that, and if it's appropriate, to then schedule a meeting if we can.
They're content to come and update on the issues outstanding with the lifts for next week.
I understand that the department are content to do that, but
There'll be some things they can't say.
if there are things that they can't say, then we can obviously scope that out as well in advance of the meeting, and a note then can be provided to members so that they know what they can and perhaps the areas that they can't ask questions on, or they won't receive a response, if you're content with that. Okay, I am mindful of what you've said, Mr. Beggs, in relation to it. Page 78, we have a request from Newry Business Improvement District to brief the committee on the controlled parking zones that only apply in Lisburn, Newry and Belfast, and I know that this is something which Ms Kimmins has raised on a number of occasions.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm obviously happy to support this. I think it would be good to have them in as soon as we can. Obviously, it's a very pertinent issue, and it's something that we'll hope to be able to get addressed fairly quickly, so I'd certainly support that.
Okay, and members, any other issues that they want to raise from the correspondence? Anyone else, anything? Mr. Beggs. Mr. Beggs?
Sorry, I got my hand was lower. Sorry.
Have you anything further that you wish to comment on? Okay, we have a response from the Minister at page 79 on a number of issues which were raised coming out of the meeting of the 19th of May, in particular around A1 safety, information engagement with SEUPB. It's a fairly light response, but if members don't have any issues in respect of that, happy to note. Okay, so generally then members are content with the suggestions as to how we deal with the correspondence. Moving then to item 6, which is subordinate legislation, SL1s which are not subject to assembly procedure. At page 86 we have SL1, the loading bays on roads, amendment number 2 order 2021. At page 88 we have SL1, the parking places disabled persons vehicles, amendment number 5 order Northern Ireland 2021. At page 91, SL1, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles Amendment Number 6 Order 2021. At page 94, SL1, the Waiting Restrictions Draperstown Order Northern Ireland 2021. At page 96, SL1, the One-Way Traffic Belfast Amendment Number 2 Order Northern Ireland 2021. And at page 98, SL1, the Waiting Restrictions Newton Hamilton Order Northern Ireland 2021. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rule? All content? Okay, thank you. Moving then to item 7, subordinate legislation SRs not subject to assembly procedures. There are 3 commencing at page 101. We have SR 2021-142, the parking and waiting restrictions, Newton Abbey, Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2021. At page 105, SR 2021-143, the private accesses on the Trunk Road T4, that's the A1 junctions, Phase 2, up Brickland to Hillsborough, stopping up Order Northern Ireland 2021. And at page 120, we have SR 2021-144, the waiting restrictions, Macará Order Northern Ireland 2021. Do members have any issues which they wish to raise on any of those SRs? Are members content with statutory rules? Don't see anyone saying otherwise. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Agreed. Moving then to item 8, we're having our departmental briefing on the budget June monitoring. Hansard will record the meeting. Tabled at page 3, we have the departmental briefing paper, and at page 8, with 2021 outturn and forecast outturn. So those 2 papers are in your tabled papers. We will welcome in person, which is lovely to see. We've Susan Anderson, the Finance Director, and Declan Bloom, the Deputy Secretary of Resources, Governance and EU Group. You're both very welcome, and particularly Declan's, actually both of you, maybe is it your first time actually physically in the committee with us too, so and congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
If you'd like to make an opening statement, and members will then follow up with some questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chair, for the introduction. I joined the department as Deputy Secretary of Resources, Governance and EU Group a few weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to engaging with the committee and very much welcome the opportunity to brief members today on the department's June monitoring round for 21-22. I'm joined today by Susan Anderson, our Finance Director, and by our Director of Network Services, Conor Lockery, who you'll see on your screens.
What about Conor? Apologies. Conor, you're very welcome to the meeting.
The June monitoring round has involved an extensive scrutiny of our financial position and forecast for this financial year, which is likely to be another year of uncertainty given the current situation as we move forward with economic recovery. If members are content, I plan on my opening remarks to firstly outline the resource position, then move on to the department's COVID pressures, and finally set out the capital position. In terms of resource, the ministers had to make some very difficult decisions in allocating opening baselines. Excluding NI Water, the department has a flat cash resource budget of 429.9 million, which does not cover inflationary pressures and is effectively a real terms cut. Indeed, it is important to say at this point that apart from Northern Ireland Water allocations, none of the department's resource bids above the 2021 opening baseline, including COVID pressures, were met. These bids are essential to ensure the delivery of many basic public services, including the provision of public transport, roads maintenance, winter gritting, planning services and active travel initiatives. The ministers therefore have been hugely proactive in reducing administrative budgets to try to address inescapable pressures to maintain frontline service delivery, and the committee has been provided with the opening budget breakdown. Resource bids submitted in this monitoring round represent the inescapable pressures faced by the department in TransLink. Bids totalling 36.7 million have been submitted for resource pressures. TransLink pressures totalling 27 million, which are largely due to inflation and new costs, despite maintaining cost efficiencies of 10 million. In addition, to minimise the impact of the resource budget outcome on roads maintenance, the TransLink baseline has had to be reduced by 5 million. Pressures for roads maintenance and winter service of 3 million and 4 million respectively have also been submitted. These bids are to maintain roads maintenance at a level similar to last year and to ensure that an average winter service can be delivered. As I have mentioned, funding was secured for NI Water in the opening budget. However, a further 1.7 million is required to meet the regulator's final determination, which has recently been published. This has also been submitted as a pressure. Finally, on resource, other departmental pressures totalling £1 million have been put forward. This includes staffing pressures and increased IT costs. The department continues to operate with a significant number of vacancies, and further investment in staffing is required if we are to maintain our ambitious capital programme and ensure that statutory duties are met. So, as you will appreciate, the overall resource outcome is extremely challenging, and very difficult decisions will be required if further funding is not secured in year. It will also have very significant implications for Northern Ireland's economic recovery, driven through the programme for government. Turning now to COVID pressures, Northern Ireland Water had its pressure met in the opening allocation. A further 20 million was allocated to the department in May, and outstanding pressures of 42.8 million have been resubmitted in the monitoring round. TransLink's financial position continues to be a concern, despite the welcome additional 50 million that was received at the end of last financial year. TransLink's financial position will be kept under close review by the department as we move through the year. Moving on to capital, 722.5 million has been allocated for capital investment in the current year, which is the largest budget that the department has ever received by some margin. Although this increase in capital will allow for investment, which will be vital if we are to deliver essential economic recovery from the pandemic, it will be extremely challenging to deliver a capital programme of this scale within a constrained resource budget. Finally, in this monitoring round, capital bids include 2 bids for flagship funding. That's 0.2 million to cover a slight increase in the cost profile of the A5 and a bid of 4.9 million to address increased costs on the S6. I hope that this briefing has outlined the challenges that the Minister faces and the difficult financial position that the Department is in. In closing, it is important to reiterate that the Minister is very keen to get the Committee's views and support in shaping and delivering improvements to people's lives and welcomes your constructive challenge and input. Susan, Conor and I are very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and you'll appreciate that the committee has been a source of support, I suppose, in many respects, for the department in sort of challenging the financial situation and lobbying for additional resource where necessary. And I suppose we are, as you have said, concerned in relation to the lack of resource vis-à-vis capital and the implications that will have and will cause as we move forward throughout this financial year. At this stage, really, all we are still hearing is that this will have an impact on basic services, and now you're saying obviously the implications for Northern Ireland recovery, and it's been very much sort of a headline as opposed to actually knowing what that really means. Are you in a position to give us any more detail about, how we will see that visibly? How will the man on the street see that? Because obviously we're concerned about road maintenance, and Conor has been with us a number of times in relation to that. But sort of broadly speaking, what does it look like if you do not get the resource allocation that the department needs?
Well, I think, if I take a step back from it, there's very little in the 24 hours of a person's life in Northern Ireland that doesn't involve the services of the Department for Infrastructure. And when you look at, for instance, the position with TransLink, or you look at the impact that this could have, for instance, on maintenance of our roads, or even ambitious things that we have in mind for the climate, to address the climate emergency, etc. You could see the impact there of not having the budget there to deliver those important services to people to help improve their lives, and a lot of what we do contributes to the wider economic growth in Northern Ireland. You've heard the expression "no drains, no cranes." The fact that we need to improve our water infrastructure is vital. The fact that we need a good transport service in Northern Ireland is vital. You'll have heard about the road conditions in Northern Ireland. Some of them need to be improved, and it's vital that we have the money there to do that. So those are the types of issues that we're going to face as a region in the absence of sufficient funding going forward. Essentially what we have done, and what Minister has been keen to do, is the commitments that we have statutory obligation to deliver, we've made the money available for those. Some of the more exciting things that we want to do by way of active travel, etc., we need to develop budgets for those in the years ahead, and we have some ambitious plans with water and sewage systems, etc., going forward. So it's about looking at what we can do right now, but looking at some of the problems that we have insofar as growing the services that we can deliver across Northern Ireland, and I think that's the real challenge for us going forward.
Okay, you have said that TransLink is obviously an ongoing concern, and we're aware of the the implications of COVID on TransLink. However, the 27 million that you've identified here for a resource bid is over and above the issues associated with COVID. Could you give us more information in relation to that and how you think that TransLink's fortunes can perhaps change?
Susan will keep me right on the figures here, but what the 27 million over and above the 50 million that was originally requested from COVID is the gap between what they think, TransLink think that they can generate by way of fares, which is in around 180 million, and then 257 million where they think is going to be the cost for them in this financial year. So there's a gap there that needs to be filled. I mean, I have my introductory meeting with the Chief Executive of TransLink next week, and we're going to be talking about just how we move forward together and how we take account of pressures that will likely emerge during the year. So I guess that's how we're viewing at the moment. I don't know if there's anything extra there.
Yeah, just I suppose to get more detail in terms of the actual pressure. A large part of that will be inflationary pressures, so the cost of fuel, etc., that will increase from one year to another, as well as staffing costs. There are also some new costs as well in this year for TransLink, such as infrastructure safety maintenance work, cyber security is another cost, insurance, and a new ticketing project as well as training backlogs too. So there's new costs coming on, combined with the inflationary pressures just to deliver the same service as last year, facing TransLink this year.
Okay, and just one more brief question before I pass on to all members have indicated. You have put in a bid for 4.9 million for the A6, reflecting an increase in the estimated cost of compensation. Could you perhaps explain what that is and why that's required?
I'm going to pass to Conor. Would you be able to answer that question, Conor? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Conor, we can't hear you.
No, I don't.
Enough. What we'll do is I'll maybe move on to other members, and if Conor gets to the stage where he can speak to us, I'll call him in. Mr. Buchanan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to follow on the Chair, and maybe if whenever Conor gets I can see that look of horror in his eyes there whenever it doesn't work. The 4.9 million, just to follow on that, but good to know, Conor, if you can hear us, or Declan or Susan, what that's like in comparison, what percentage of an increase is in that in compensation? You know, what was the total compensation? So the 4.9 is whatever percentage more. I suppose just to follow on from Michelle's question, you know, what brought about that 4.9 million increase? It's a lot of money, you know, and obviously it'd be good to know what that's like in percentage terms. And then another point is probably, it might be a Conor answer on obviously the road maintenance stroke resource capital budget. Obviously we know there's a capital increase in money on roads, but obviously to the west is an issue, a legal issue, I understand, ongoing. And I have great concerns about that because I'm seeing nothing happening in the west of the province at all in roads. Yes, there's small items. I think it's under the £15,000 on the resource repairs, which is very small in it, but no capital projects because there's obviously some legal case going on. Have you any update on that? And I appreciate it is a legal case, but have you any update on where that's sitting? Because we're now in the middle of the summer when all that work should be being carried out and nothing's happening.
Yeah, I don't know if Conor can come in, but if not, I'll maybe. No, I mean, as a department, as Minister is carefully considering all of the legal advice. Conor and his team are looking at building in provisional plans in the event that they aren't able to spend in the areas they want to. So they're having a look at that, and they will be bringing forward some ideas and some options in the event that we do need to divert money to another part of the road side of things. So all the advice is currently still being considered, and we're just making decisions on next steps. But there's a lot of work going on with Conor's team to look at how we would put in alternative plans if needs be.
And I'm not sure whether you can get contractors from the east to come across the west. I appreciate that's with the department, but nothing's happening in the west of the province, so I'm concerned about that because we've had one or two, fairly easy winters, and hasn't an impact. But the minute you get a bad winter, you will see the benefits of not working in the summertime. Absolutely. And I suppose the last question for now, anyway, is the community transport. What way did you see that 750,000 under COVID pressure? What's that figure like in comparison to what they get in totality? Was it, again, be good to know a sort of an increase, and how was that how did you distribute that across all community transport, or based on what they did over COVID times? It's how that was spent.
Yeah, so again, we're just working through the detail of that, so that's when we'll probably come back in writing just to give you the detail and the breakdown of it.
Just what they normally get, and then what that percentage is like, and how that 750 was sort of spread out, and under what basis.
Okay.
Because obviously I know out and about, for example, in my local area, I did a lot of food to elderly people, etc., etc. So that's all for now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and hopefully Conor will be able to rejoin us and perhaps answer some of those questions. Mr. Boylan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and could have just welcomed them all. Hope Conor's able to come back in. Just probably to Susan, Chair. I mean, I know she mentioned the TransLink. Susan, in terms then of TransLink's reserves, can you give us a wee update on their reserves, please?
Okay, so last year we were successful in bidding for an extra 50 million to supplement TransLink's reserves as part of historic underfunding over the previous years. And then further in relation to COVID funding this financial year, out of the 20 million that the department has received for all COVID pressures, TransLink then has received an allocation of 18 million. But whenever we offset that against then the total COVID pressures being reported by TransLink, and indeed the non-COVID pressures, the 27 million that we're talking about already this morning, it does leave us in a position where we need to consider the overall position on how we move forward throughout the year.
I appreciate that, and just question obviously with Declan, and Declan, good luck on your new post, and also Conor, because I mean, like Mr. Buchanan, obviously the RA representative deal with a lot of rural roads issues, and I'm just wondering what's been allocated this year, what we're looking at in terms of allocations for the rural roads maintenance budget, because I mean, and I appreciate, Declan, what you've said about resource, but I mean, clearly COVID did play a big part in terms of some of the works. I know there was some good work done, but there was works there that obviously would be outstanding. I was just never got that. No fault of the department, obviously, because of the restrictions and everything else went with it. But just moving forward in terms of what we're spending now and what's our plans for new rural roads maintenance schemes or budgets there, could anybody respond to that, please?
Yeah, Mr. Boylan, Susan's going to answer that question. We have a figure.
Yeah, I can give you sort of the high-level figures on this. So in terms of the total roads recovery fund, this year Minister has set aside 17 million, and within that then 15 million has been set aside specifically to address rural roads.
Chair, can I just test to see if I'm being heard?
Yes, we can hear you now, Conor.
Yeah, good. It's amazing what restarting can do. Can I come in now, Chair, if that's okay? Yes, just there was a couple of questions. I was able to hear you okay.
Yes, please.
The queries that were raised on the A6 is not something I'm directly involved with, but I certainly know the work of the contractor was impacted by COVID, and I have no doubt that some of the money relates to that. But maybe if we need more details, maybe something we could write back to committee separately on.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
To provide a bit more detail on that 4.9 million. On a couple of members have raised issues around the contracts, and yes, it's certainly something we're aware of. There are contract difficulties, and we're trying to work our way through that and to understand the impacts. It's certainly going to be difficult to spend the increased budgets we have this year, given these difficulties. But yeah, that's something we're having a look at, and we'll maybe provide an update to committee once we fully understand the issues and what the picture's like going forward.
Okay, I think probably in relation to that, it'd be really helpful if we could get a timeline, because the year goes in very quickly, but there are also a number of contractors there who were anticipating this work, and that could cause serious difficulties for them and their workforce, as well as obviously the communities in which these works need to be carried out in.
Yeah, just to respond to that as well. Yeah, that's certainly, we're acutely aware of that. Just picking up on the 17 million pounds for the Road Recovery Fund, which Susan referred to. Of which 15 of that is on rural roads. I see the vast majority of that being delivered to contracts that aren't part of the legal challenge. So I would expect us to be delivering that on the rural roads this year.
Okay, Mr. Buchanan, did you want to come back?
If you don't mind, Chair, just on that, Conor, you know the way the some of those contractors can do a smaller, I think it's a £15,000 figure, and they can do a smaller contract. But do they not have a limit then? They can only do so many 15,000. Is that then going to be a restriction for this rural roads recovery scheme? So in other words, is there contractors there that can deliver that specifically in the West?
Yeah, well, yeah, there certainly are limiting factors around outputs, but as I say, it's part of the wider consideration we're giving to the whole issue of contracts and what we can deliver, not only in the West but right across the province. So it is something that we will update committee on once we fully understand the issues.
Yeah, it'd be good just to get an update on where you're at with the larger contracts and if we can actually spend that in the West based on the smaller figures per smaller contracts. Thank you, Chair, and thanks.
Okay. Mr. Boylan, apologies.
Thanks, Carol.
No, I appreciate Mr. Buchanan jumping in the West, but there's a few other parts of the country might need done as well, Chair. But Conor, just on that, I mean, say, just to keep the committee updated, it's welcome that there's more money being allocated, but it's no good if we can't spend it. And you've indicated there that it can be spent in most cases, and it's just to keep the committee obviously and ourselves updated in relation to that. A couple of points, obviously, Declan, I want to raise in terms of the electric charge points in ESB and what the department is going to do in respect of that, and also the blue-green fund. If you'd like to maybe respond to that, please, if there's anything there. Thank you.
I wouldn't have detail on that. I can come back to you on that, Mr. Boylan. I know we've set aside 20 million for the blue-green budget, with some ambitious ideas about how we can make best use of our blue-green land, but I haven't got the detail of that, but I will come back to you on that.
And on the electric charge points issue as well, because I know the Minister was keen to move forward in terms of the electric vehicles issue. So if you give us a wee update on in relation to the department's work with ESB as well, okay?
Okay, we'll follow that.
Chair, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome everyone to the committee meeting. Just a couple of things. First of all, just following on from what Carol had mentioned around the investment in active travel and the blue-green fund. I think from reading you there, it's £20 million for this financial year. Just to confirm that is that the case?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'd just like to outline my extreme disappointment at that, because the department has a 29% increase in its capital budget, but essentially the investment and the blue-green fund is not all of it, but it's a substantial element in terms of active travel, has actually been frozen. So essentially, in comparative terms, there's been a cut in active travel. Now, if the department are real around their commitments in terms of active travel and sustainable transport, then the money needs to follow that. And to see that frozen at £20 million, to me, all the statements of all the strategies, all the documents mean nothing, because the money's not being invested in that area. So I just wanted to outline that from my own perspective, because that's an extreme disappointment. I've heard that it was possible it was going to be £20 million and it was going to be frozen, but now that that's confirmed, that sends out a really bad message, especially in light of the strategies that were announced last week. So I recognise your officials and your detail on what the outcome has been in terms of the Minister's decisions, and I respect that, but I wanted to outline my disappointment in relation to that, because that comes on top of a flat cash resource budget, which makes delivery of a lot of these issues a lot more difficult. Just in terms of a couple of questions, I would declare at the outset that my stepfather is a quality manager for the A6, because I know that that's referenced within the report, and I'll not be asking any questions in relation to that. In relation to the resource budget and that being largely flat, but the capital budget being increased, I think the last time we discussed this, one of the discussions was around the innovative ways to try to find ways to be able to progress the capital budget in that context. So it would be, for example, capitalising stuff which is previously considered as resource expenditure. I just want to see if there's been any developments in that field, because there's real concern that with that increase in the capital budget, the department will struggle to be able to spend it without the additional resource.
Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so just in relation to the capitalisation of costs, we do, whenever we're looking at schemes, go through quite forensically to see what we can actually capitalise. And we do look, we obviously have to comply with the accounting standards, so we do look to make sure that we're also complying with those, but also seeking to maximise what we can capitalise. And as I say, we do that on a scheme by scheme or project by project basis as well. So we are working internally on that. Nothing significant, I suppose, to report at this stage, but we are looking at that carefully.
Okay, it's just with that increased capital, but not an increased resource. Last year, it was outlined that no additional bids were made towards the end of the financial year in relation to roads resurfacing because there wasn't the resource to be able to turn around the work within the department to get that delivery on the ground. I just want to see if has anything changed, because I'm just really worried that we're going to approach the end of the financial year with significant issues here in terms of being able to get this capital spending delivered.
So really that's in terms of capacity to deliver. I'm wondering, yes. Conor, is there anything that you could maybe add in relation to that one?
Yeah, just to say it's one of the factors we're aware of, and as I said, there are a whole range of issues at the minute around delivery. The resource internally, resource externally, they're all in the mix at the minute for consideration. And to say, once we know the picture a bit better, we'll come back to committee on that.
Yeah, I just think we're now into June, so we're over 2 months into the financial year, and I think it's important we get sight on what the strategy is to address this, because if we had a situation where the department's been awarded an increased capital budget, but is unable to turn that around and also unable to make bids as part of monitoring rounds because of that resource pressure, then that would be a significant issue. So just it would be important we get sight of what the department's doing to try to address that at an earliest opportunity, if that's okay, Conor?
That's fine.
Yeah. And one other issue, just in relation to roads maintenance, number of issues people come to me as an MLA, and one of the top issues alongside waiting lists is in relation to roads maintenance. To be honest, waiting list goes way up to the top, where roads maintenance comes in really quite significantly in terms of people contacting me. 2 questions. The Barton Review recommended that there be £143 million spent per year on structural maintenance. Just want to see in terms of what's the forecast in terms of the department being able to meet that, and also has the budget been confirmed for each division in terms of the work that's going to be happening in their area? Because people are asking me when are these works are going to occur, and we're, as I said, over 2 months into the financial year, and they want to know, when are these roads going to be resurfaced, when are the pavements going to be fixed, because they're really in desperate state of disrepair.
Yeah, certainly. For the first question, if we park the issues around the difficulties we're having on contracts, then we're certainly moving in the right direction towards the Barton figure. The 120 million this year far exceeded anything we've had in recent years, so it's certainly going in the right direction towards the Barton 143 million. Obviously, we've mentioned the difficulties we're having this year across a range of issues on contracts, and that will obviously, we need to understand that better, and that will feed into the allocations that go to divisions, so that's still very much a work in progress.
Okay, so the allocation has not occurred to the divisions yet?
There's provisional. We're currently in discussions with divisions about capacity to deliver, and we're also taking cognizance of the contract issues.
Yeah, it's just, we're well into the financial year, and if this was any business, it wouldn't be operating if we're working on that basis that budgets and plans haven't been confirmed well already into the financial year. So whenabouts is that likely to happen?
Well, we certainly know what we would like to be doing, but as I say, we need to get to the bottom of the restrictions arising from the contract difficulties. It obviously impacts in some areas more than others. So we'll just continue to analyse the position and to make decisions on the basis of that.
I think it's important that there are plans in place on road maintenance, etc. throughout the year, but they're indicative because we're taking account of the recent developments. So it's just about making sure that we're progressing. But I wouldn't want to give the committee the impression that nothing is happening yet. Work is ongoing, and there are plans being delivered on, but they're just being looked at in the context of the most recent legal issues. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Fundamental is I need to be able to go back to constituents and tell them whether work's going to be occurring on the ground or not. You know, that's the reality I'm in. And being able to tell them, you know, I've taken up cycling the last 3 months because I've been injured from running. And some of the roads I've nearly been knocked off my bicycle because they're in an absolute state. And the cars are being damaged. We've seen in relation to compensation claims coming out of it. So we need to be able to give people a bit of hope and a bit of light in terms of when this is going to be turned around. So we just need to have timescales when we're going to have confirmed programme for works for these divisions. And if I'm being honest, I'll be leaving this committee meeting going, I don't know.
Well, could I assure you, Mr Mayor, that there are plans in place for road maintenance throughout the region, but that there are also provisional plans being developed in light of most recent legal advice. So if you take away that there is work planned out, work probably already happening on the ground, but that these plans will have to be revisited in light of the legal advice. But that doesn't mean nothing will happen. That means plans will just need to be reshaped as we go into the later part of the year.
Okay, just one last question. In the context, sorry,
Can I just add to that?
Yes, no problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Could I just add to that the divisions will be going to councils with their council reports over the next, June and July, and we will have programmes included within those. Obviously, in some areas where we're having the legal difficulties, we'll have to consider how to present that and what caveats to put in there. But certainly in some areas, we should have full programmes.
Okay.
In the majority of areas.
Yeah. In relation to those areas where there's legal difficulties in relation to the contracts, is there a possibility that there will be less works occurring in those areas and more works occurring in other areas as a result of that?
Well, those are all the things that we're considering and looking at the minute, because there's all sorts of restrictions around the contracts and ability or lack of ability to move contractors and to move works. So these are all things that we're currently considering at the minute, and we'll see what our conclusions are in due course.
Okay, thank you very much, Conor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kimmins.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you for the briefing this morning. Just I suppose a couple of things, and firstly leading on from what Mr Mayor said around the active travel budget, and I know Sharon's frustration about how it's only received 3% of the department's budget this year, and I understand that it's partly tied up with pre-commitments and the like, but it isn't good enough if we want to see walking and cycling become a bigger part of the way we get around. So I was just wondering, can you comment on how much funding we can expect to go towards active travel this year?
Yes, so in addition to the 20 million then for blue-green, on the resource side there's an allocation of 660,000 with a further 500,500 allocation this year. Now decisions on those are still being worked up, but that's the funding that has been set aside then for this year in resource, and that's in addition then to the 20 million in blue-green.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And just in relation to the bid for departmental pressures, and it said including funding for Waterways Ireland, can you give me a wee bit more detail on that as well?
Yes, I'll pick up on that one. So it's a small amount actually that's set aside for Waterways Ireland. It's just a couple of 100,000 set aside, so it's really just in terms of resource pressures. There's nothing significant to draw out there. It's just their routine resource pressures. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's grand. I suppose, and again, coming on from Mr Premier's points around roads maintenance, and I mean, my constituency in Uri Armagh, I'm sure my colleagues there would agree, it's probably the biggest issue that we're all dealing with. Conor, did you just say there that there was 120 million this year for that? Can I just clarify that?
Yes, the initial allocation for structural maintenance is 120 million, of which 17 is Roads Recovery Fund and 15 of that goes towards rural roads. That's the initial allocation. And
it's 20 million more than last year. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. That's correct.
Yeah. I suppose just to try and get a sense then, I know obviously there are issues around contracts, but as I said, there's a huge list of what needs to be done. Do you foresee that once the contract issue is resolved, that it would make a good a good dent, I suppose, in what is needed to be done, or how do you see that panning out?
Yeah, well, it obviously depends on where the contract issues takes us to. If we didn't have those, certainly it would. It's a 20% increase in last year, which is 100 million outturn of that order, something similar the year before. So it certainly would be a bit more in structural maintenance and surface dressing than it would be typically in other years.
Okay, that's grand. I suppose we'll just probably keep an eye on that and see how things work out with the other issues that are sort of holding it back. And just my last question, at the previous meeting on the budget, you had mentioned that there was a fund requirement in relation to the reservoir safety maintenance, and that will have to be factored into where the Minister prioritises their budget. Is there any further information on that at this stage?
On the reservoirs, so within our staffing pressures, departmental pressures, within there we have staffing pressures which would include any additional staff required for the reservoirs work.
And we've taken on responsibility from that, as you will know, from the 2nd of June. So we're currently looking at what that entails and scoping it out to make sure that we're well positioned to make sure we deliver on our responsibilities. So those discussions actually are happening this afternoon. So we'll be taking that forward over the coming weeks.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks very much. That's all from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Declan, Susan and Connor, for your presentation and the information we received. I just want to make a few comments initially. I was glad to hear the recognition, Declan, from yourself and others that you have received, the department has received, the biggest capital budget ever. I am a little bit concerned about the comments, but there may be difficulties in spending some of it, because in the other hand we're here, no, it's not enough. And of course there'll never be enough, because there's always going to be pressures within the department, as there will be with every department. And when we're dealing with Tory cuts, that's going to add additional pressures, but a little bit concerned about that. I'm glad to hear that NI water allocation, that was met in full for what was submitted at that time. I'm also conscious of what you said, that since then, that the regulator determination has come through, so there's a bit of pressure has emanated from that, and that's been pursued. Translink is something that we're all focusing on, but the 50 million received at the end of last financial year, that alleviated some of that pressure. And I just want to comment as someone from Derry and who's acutely aware of the needs, particularly around two roads, the A5 and the A6. And there are some people within my constituency and others, other areas of the north, who need the A5 and A6 and needed it for decades, and are getting a little bit cheesed off, I suppose, at some commentary, running commentary in relation to questioning whether there is a need for the A5, because for some people that smacks of the discriminatory attitudes that were there, dressed up now as something else there in the past. So thankfully, as you have recognised that there's a slight profile and an increased cost, and thankfully, apart from those attitudes that we hear at times, that there is cross-party support for the A5 and the A6, and the A5 is something we need to be taking forward. The questions I would like to ask relates to, as part of the 20 million allocation the department received in May for COVID pressures, I believe 750,000 went more towards community transport. So could you elaborate, please, in relation to the pressures that the service was facing and how they're faring out after receiving this allocation?
I think that's one that we've sort of committed to come back in writing on, so we'll follow up with a written input on that one.
Okay, Susan. Susan, or whoever, in relation to the transport sector, like the bus and taxi operators and taxi drivers, it's something that this committee, in terms of members of the committee, we're very focused on that particular sector and all the relevant strands of it. They're still hoping that additional support is coming down the line, and as they will be most likely sort of taking longer than any other sector to reach the pre-COVID business level. So has there been any consideration given in relation to providing financial support during the monitoring rounds, for instance, for those in these sectors? And I'm also conscious that there's another area in relation to, for instance, taxi drivers around the entry tests, but we'll come back to that because that's one way we could get more taxi drivers into a system that needs it now, as opposed to waiting for months on those taxi drivers to become available.
Okay, so at this stage we haven't submitted a bid as part of June monitoring for any further schemes. I think the process is that we need to work through closure of the existing schemes, see where we are, and at that point then consideration will be given in line with the Executive's recovery strategy as to whether another scheme is required. So we're still working through that process at the moment.
So consideration will be given at the stage when those schemes are, as you're saying, completed or dealt with?
Once the schemes have been completed, then again it'll be next steps, what needs to be considered then, yeah.
Okay, so there's nothing in this June monitoring round,
No.
but maybe in others. Okay.
No, not at this
I previously asked the department about what it was doing in relation to the quality impact assessment and on the minister's, finalised budget. So has that been carried out? Has an EQIA been carried out?
So in terms of equality, on the draft budget we completed our screening and that is available on the department's website. In terms of then the final budget position, we completed our capital screening and again that should be published shortly, and equally then on the resource side we completed a screening too and that should be published in due course.
In screening, was everything screened out? Because there would need to be an EQIA done unless everything was screened out, and that would hardly be likely to happen across the department.
From a departmental perspective, it was screened out. That was the outcome. Our NDPBs, the likes of NI Water and TransLink as a public corp, will complete their own equality screenings once they get their budget outcome as well. So there's separate processes in place for those bodies.
So the department is not doing a full EQIA?
No, we've just completed the screening and it's been screened out.
Okay, I'll pick up on that because, Chair, I would be concerned about that, how across the department that everything was screened out. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Beggs?
Hello, and thanks for your information to date. I want to go back to the resurfacing issue again, where, Conor, you've indicated about 120 million is hoped to be spent this year, but the Barton figure recommendation was 143. My understanding is that an audit office estimate was there was a 1.2 billion backlog. I think that was in 2019 in resurfacing that's required to maintain our roads. So my question is, what is the current figure of backlog that the department estimates for resurfacing? And in terms of that backlog, if we're less than Barton, so I take it we're still getting worse?
I wouldn't have a figure. Obviously, the more we spend, the better the roads get, and the reduction in the backlog. I wouldn't have a figure to hand. I'm not sure if it has been analysed since then, but it's something I'm happy to have a look at and come back to you.
But would you accept if we're spending less than the Barton recommendation, the maintenance has not been kept at the minimum level, and therefore our roads surface are getting worse?
Well, there's a lot of factors, contribute. The extent of winters is obviously a major factor on the condition of roads, which have been, relatively mild in this last couple of years. So, it's the finance is one part of it, but there've been reduced traffic on roads last year, for example. Weather conditions would have been as bad. So there's a number of factors to be considered that would contribute to that.
Turning to the emergency repair budget, the fixing the potholes, which I realise is an expensive option when you have to go that way. Is it still set at 50 mil, and is there still a shortfall there? 50 mil, a 2-inch hole before any repair happens?
Yes, certainly the resource bid of 7 million is aiming to take us to where we were last year, but we're already committed to the same level of service in relation to those key areas of pothole repair, grass cutting and gully emptying. So yes, it's the same as last year in that it's 50 mil on all roads, but 20 mil on higher traffic roads would be the trigger level for pothole repair.
Okay. Then turning to the roads maintenance contracts issue, where you're out of time in some areas. I'm assuming you're looking at if there's a short-term fix, but there's also a long-term issue in terms of having to issue new contracts. So where are we in each of those two issues? Are you trying to see if you can extend the existing contracts, and when do you propose to advertise so that there's a permanent solution?
All those issues are currently being considered. They're all live and under consideration at the minute. So we haven't concluded on those, but they're certainly being considered at the minute.
And what's the length of time if you have to go to tender? Are we still subject to the 6 months European advertising regulation?
Well, there's different types of contracts of different timelines. So it depends on the scale and type and size of the contract. So again, that's something that we're looking at.
Can you clarify if it's large enough, or is Northern Ireland still subject to European regulations on issuing contracts?
I would believe that it is. It's something we'd possibly have to confirm separately in writing, but I'm not aware of any relaxation in requirements.
Okay. Turning to in your monitoring bit then, you mentioned some new costs, and then you've mentioned cybersecurity. I can understand that being a new issue. There's been major attacks on infrastructure around the world, dare I say. But it also mentions real infrastructure safety maintenance work. Can you allude what new issues are arisen there in terms of health and safety? Because obviously that's very important that it's addressed.
Again, I don't have the detail to hand on that one, but we can get some further information.
I don't think it's new issues that have arisen. It's more of a programme of work that needs to be taken forward in compliance with regulations. But yeah, we'll follow that up. Sorry.
And you've also mentioned a maintenance and training backlog. Now, my understanding is that garages and essential travel, they were all key workers, and bus and trains were actually operating on a reduced service during much of the COVID period. So I'm surprised to learn that there's a maintenance and training backlog. So can you explain a little bit more about why there's a maintenance and training backlog?
No, we don't. Sorry, we don't have that information, but we'll come back to you with the information in due course.
Okay. Again, on the I6, I'm interested in the proportion of increased on the estimate costs for compensation for property that has had to be vested. Certainly, I'm aware that there's been a number of major infrastructure investments where there's been underinvestment. So I think it'd be very useful if we hear how accurate the estimates that are originally put in turning out, and so I would be very interested to know as to what proportion this additional 4.9 million bid. If it has to be bought, it has to be bought. But I'm just thinking, why has it gone significant increase? It's another £5 million. Whose were those estimates, and why that has gone wrong? And then finally, in terms of DVA, you've indicated that you're looking at additional monies there because they're operating less than full capacity in a number of areas. Now, I'm aware that ordinary garages have been operating right through the COVID period, taking sensible precaution, perhaps staff wearing masks where they may have to briefly be in close proximity, etc. So can you allude to why DVA is not able to work close to full capacity, because that's quite a significant additional piece of money that you're looking. Certainly, if it is the test centres themselves, have DVA looked at extending the hours to create additional space for staff rather than simply reducing output?
Yeah, I understand that DVA has looked at all those options to try and maximise what it can deliver this financial year, but still adhering to the public health advice at the same time.
Have you had an explanation of why they're operating at less than full capacity? I mean, what restrictions have resulted in them losing income?
We probably don't have that information at hand, but I suspect, I mean, you draw the comparison with private garages, but they probably have less of a throughput than you would imagine going through a test centre. So it's probably so that we comply with PHA guidelines to make sure that the throughput of any of our centres is compliant with the regulations, to make sure that no one's health or safety has been put at risk. So that's probably why the numbers are lower going through. Than you would probably imagine, but it's because I suspect of just applying COVID regulations.
You're saying probable. I mean, if you're coming here looking for support for a range of issues, I would expect you to know why the money is required rather than what's probably required for.
It's a fair point.
Okay, thank you.
It is a fair point, but what we would do is we'll follow this up with DVA colleagues. We were just trying to give you an answer, but I understand.
Just one final point. I've noticed in terms of your forecast outcome for last financial year, very considerable variations in expenditure from 21 million in April to 102 million in March. They obviously, and again, there's been a significant increase in January, February, March, and that is certainly not the best time to be putting tar down on roads if that's what a lot of the money was being spent on. And again, I don't know. But so my question is, are you looking to see how you can get a better balanced expenditure over all the year, so that there isn't panic expenditure and perhaps having to pay over the odds because of limited capacity during a concentrated period?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're developing the department's business plan at the moment, and it's about making sure that we line up the objectives for this year alongside what our budget is. So you would hope that we would intend to make sure that our plans are taking account of the budget and making sure everything's properly programmed in throughout the year, rather than any last minute expenditure.
And can you give us a breakdown of what the capital expenditure plan is for the year? Because all I've seen so far is the headline figure. Where are you proposing to spend that money? So we'll have a better idea.
Well, we're putting capital 215 million towards Northern Ireland Water, 170 million towards TransLink, 223.1 million towards roads and rivers. Susan, have you got any other figures?
Yeah, and flagship projects will account for about 78 million, and then we've got other of about 35 million, which would include the Blue Green Fund, for example, the 20 million in there, and some borrowing for our trust ports as well.
One of the points I've been trying to make is that continuing to invest in large-scale infrastructure projects whilst not investing in the necessary maintenance means that and we haven't hit the Barton figure for maintenance, means that our road surfaces are continuing to decline. We can therefore expect to face higher levels of compensation, more potholes, etc., and having to pay for emergency repairs. It's not an efficient way to carry out roads maintenance, but that's what we're destined for unless we up our road surfacing expenditure.
Yeah, well, it won't be an either or, but what we're trying to do is plan out a programme of works on roads throughout the year to take account of all road conditions across Northern Ireland. So there are plans, as I said, that have been developed across the road service, but those plans are actually being revisited just in light of recent legal advice. So there will be plans in place to make sure that all types of roads are addressed in the coming year.
And when can you expect the advice of your plan?
If Connor's on the screen there, Connor can tell us.
Well, certainly normally the programmes are relayed through the council reports. It's our normal process, and those are happening over in June and July. Some will be more fuller than others. You know, when we do know the programmes, some areas, as I say, where there are issues, we'll have to think about how to present that. But certainly in all areas, we fully take your point that we want to be getting schemes to ground as soon as possible, and we certainly have full programmes that we're taking forward at the minute, because we're mindful that it's better to, for a whole host of reasons, to put down blacktop in the summer months with reduced traffic levels, longer working hours. So we agree with you totally on that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chair?
Cheers. Thank you. Apologies for late entry to the meeting. Sorry, my voice isn't the best at the moment. The voluntary exit scheme obviously affected various sections across the department over a period of years and has been responsible maybe for a reduction in skills and maybe senior positions and whatnot. Conscious of the resource budget, will they be looking at ensuring staff are distributed correctly across the departments to get an even queue where there is those voids?
Yeah, I mean, the voluntary exit scheme back in 2015 certainly had an impact right across the Northern Ireland Civil Service, indeed the agency that I ran, we lost almost 20% of our staff, but you rebuild and move forward and restructure accordingly, and that's what we're trying to do as a department. And most recently we've started having discussions around the senior team that we're going to look at our staff and look at where our priority areas are to make sure as best as possible that we can direct staff to our pressure points to make sure that everything is being taken forward in the best way that we can. I mean, it is a process, and the vagaries of recruiting staff, etc., take time. But we are going to be working closely to do that, because we do recognise that with gaps across the department, as it is in all departments, that we need to address those and address those quickly to make sure that we deliver on all our priorities.
Yeah, it's just usually whatever section of the department comes forward to give evidence, it normally rears its head as one of the issues, which is sort of curtailing things, you know.
Yeah, but we will be working to address that, and as we have been doing since BES. So you know, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been reorganising the department to make sure that we have the right people in the right places as best as we can. Conscious that we do have some gaps, and we do have vacancies that need to be filled, and work closely with Northern Ireland Civil Service HR department.
Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously there were a number of questions there that members asked, and you're going to follow up with more detail. And I suppose really for the committee, I suppose that detail is really very important in order for us to be able to scrutinise. So really, you've mentioned drafting of business plans and so on. At what point will that be then shared with the committee?
Well, we're hoping to finalise the business plan in the coming weeks, and then seek ministerial approval. So I'm hoping, I would be optimistic that it will be this side of summer, as in the next 4 to 5 weeks. That's the hope. We are in the final throes of finalising the business plan, so hopefully that will be there.
And is it at that point then the Minister then will announce her priorities then for the remainder of the year?
Well, I don't know what ministers plan to announce. I know she announced recently the budget and where it's going to be directed. So within the plan, it will set out what our priorities are as a department. So I guess by extension, yeah, that's what that will say.
Okay, thank you very much, Declan, Susan and Connor. Thank you for attending today. And I may not see you again, but certainly the committee will.
Good luck in your new role. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, members, moving then on to our second briefing, which is in relation to commercial bus service permits and transport integration. Hansard won't be recording this section of the meeting. We have the briefing paper from the department at page 127, and then in your table papers we have the Hansard of the briefing from the bus and coach representatives of the 2nd of June. And we'll welcome via Starleaf with Jackie Robinson, Director of Public Transport Division, and Stuart Gilmore, the Head of Public Transport Regulation Branch. You're both very welcome to the meeting this morning. It's good to see you. Jackie, if you'd like to make your opening remarks, and then members will follow up with some questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So thanks to you and to the committee members for the presentation, for the opportunity to come and present this morning. And we are going to talk through the commercial bus service permit system. So as you've already said, I'm Jackie Robinson. I'm the Director of Public Transport. Stuart, who's joining me today, is the Head of Public Transport Regulation Branch. As detailed in your briefing note, the bus permit scheme was introduced following the Transport Act 2011. The aim of the scheme is to enable bus operators to identify gaps in the public transport network and to provide that service under a bus permit issued by the department. The system complements the public transport network that the Department facilitates through the public service agreement with TransLink. The legislation sets out the considerations the Department must take into account and who should be consulted when assessing those applications. The Minister and the Department recognises the valuable role that the private bus and coach sector play in delivering public transport, and I would just like to put that on record this morning. So in relation to the legislation specifically, sections 3 to 12 set out the key considerations which the Department must take into account in considering permit applications. It also sets out who the Department must consult with when processing the application, and that consultee list includes the Consumer Council, persons already providing services on any road along or near the routes which are subject to the application, the Chief Constable, District Councils, other government departments and the Tourist Board. So a number of bus permits are already in operation, including 34 regular stopping services, 26 of which are primarily for the transport of school children, 12 taxi bus services, 5 sightseeing services and 3 express services. If an operator identifies a gap in provision and wants to run a service to meet the need, they complete an application providing information to the Department. That information includes evidence of the need for the specific route and demand on that route. In assessing the information provided, the Department consults with organisations listed in the legislation. The Consumer Council received the original submission as well as responses from other consultees to inform their final recommendations. This does add to the time frame for the consultation stage, but also recognises that in the legislation, the Department is required to take account of the recommendations made by CCNI, and this additional step ensures that they have all the available information to help inform those recommendations. You will be aware that following an unsuccessful application for a bus permit, an operator did apply for a judicial review of the process. Following on from that JR application, the Department reviewed the process used for permit applications and made a number of changes to ensure the process was robust and that sufficient expert advice was included in the decision making. In developing the changes to the process, the Department engaged with a number of key stakeholders, including Bus and Coach NI, who represent a large part of the private bus and coach industry in Northern Ireland, and also several bus permit operators. We also consulted with TransLink, MTAC, the NTA, Tourism NI, PSNI, DVA and the Consumer Council. These changes were subsequently approved by the Department in May 2019. Following restoration of the Assembly, the Minister approved referral of applications to her when the application is assessed to have a significant impact on the strategic public transport network or present potential policy implications. The most significant changes relating to the creation of the new branch, public transport, within Public Transport Division, so that's the Public Transport Regulation branch that Stuart heads up, and that branch is tasked with administering the system as well as the introduction of a determination panel to consider new applications. The purpose of the panel is to provide a more detailed scrutiny and review of all available evidence. The 3-person panel is chaired by the Director of Public Transport Division, which is currently me, in addition to 2 DFI staff at grade 5 or grade 6 level. The panel considers the evidence provided and make a determination to approve, refuse, or where an application is assessed to have a significant impact on the strategic public transport network, the panel can refer the determination to the Minister. To ensure a robust evidence-based approach, the panel are provided with all evidence submitted by the applicant, responses and comments from consultees, any available specialist advice, and analysis prepared by the branch. In addition, a background brief is also prepared for panel members to advise them on the relevant legislative considerations and other issues in making a consideration. This is important to ensure that all panel members are fully aware of the background and the legal context in which they take decisions. They also sign conflict of interest declarations. In the case of renewal and amendment applications, the Head of Public Transport Regulation branch considers these and a determination panel is not required. Other changes to the process include the use of specialist advice where necessary, so for example, economists, statisticians, transport planners, and an increased cooperation between the department and the applicant throughout the process. The applicant now has the ability to see and agree what will be issued to consultees. All of the changes made are designed to improve the process and ensure it provides for fair and robust decision making within the bounds of the legislation. This has resulted in an increase in the estimated time to process applications. So the first permit application to be processed under these new arrangements was approved by the Department in December 2019. A further 11 applications have been processed, with 5 being approved and 6 being referred to the Minister. As a result of the changes, draft guidelines document was issued to operators, industry groups and the Consumer Council in March of this year. Following written feedback and a meeting in April, officials agreed to do further work on the guidelines and to undertake a wider, more detailed consultation exercise. In terms of engagement, the Department established a bus operator forum in December 2019, which has continued to meet regularly since then. The aim of this forum is to increase communication and engagement with the industry and to work in collaboration with operators who deliver a valuable addition to the public transport offering in Northern Ireland. I understand that BCNI have also provided the committee with a copy of their feedback to the draft guidelines, and in the written feedback that the department has provided to you, we have endeavoured to address the issues insofar as possible. I do not intend to reiterate the briefing, but we will be happy to address any concerns. I would, however, like to take a couple of minutes to elaborate on the increase in timeframes included in the draft guidelines. So the increase in the timeframe is significant and represents a number of things. Firstly, experience from the department in the time it takes to complete the application process. Secondly, the need to allow time for expert consideration and the running of a determination panel. It also includes an increased time frame for consultation. This reflects feedback from consultees that they should be given sufficient time to give due consideration to the information presented to them. I appreciate that the increased time frame is frustrating, but I hope that making it clear to potential applicants in advance how long the process may take will allow them to plan. There are opportunities for the process to be considerably shorter, and we will regularly review the process and update our guidelines as we learn more. In relation to the process for renewal applications, there are again opportunities for refinement and streamlining, and we will keep that under review as the next generation of renewals are processed. While renewal applications do not require submission to the determination panel, consultation with the consultees is required, and that's set down in legislation. Permit renewal is required every 3 years, and again that is set in legislation. As I've already said, following the issues raised by the industry in relation to the draft guidelines, we will be engaging with them over the coming months to ensure that the guidelines are accurate and best serve the needs of industry while ensuring that the legislative requirements are maintained. So, Chair and committee members, Stuart and I will be very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie, for your presentation. And I mean, you have paid tribute to the sector and that you've recognised the role that they play, but they have been under severe challenge this last year. They have had difficulties, particularly with regards to sort of tourist aspect of their businesses. They have sought and indeed faced a number of challenges in relation to financial support. So you can see that this is a sector which is under severe pressure. And obviously at this stage now, when they have a meeting, as we understand, on the 14th of April, where they feel that this is the first opportunity that they've had to present with new guidance, that it comes to them as a shock, as you will know from the presentation that we received last week. They do feel that in some ways that they're perhaps not highly regarded, that there is no real place for them in the delivery of transport routes. Can I just ask, from a general perspective, where the department sees the private operators, where their role really is in the delivery of transport service?
So, as I've already said, the purpose of this scheme is to allow private operators to provide services which complement the network, which is primarily delivered through the PSA with TransLink, as you're well aware. The PSA stipulates that the Transport Holding Company, or TransLink, must deliver most public transport services, but we're very aware that there are gaps in that provision. And we would very much like the private sector to be able to help us and fill those gaps. And ultimately, the most important people in all this are the passengers on board our public transport network. We have presented to the stakeholder forum, or the forum that we have with the bus operators, what we consider to be a gap analysis. And I know that that wasn't complete, but it did give an indication of where we thought there was potential gaps. And we would very much like to work on a collaborative basis with the industry to make sure that the public in Northern Ireland are best served by the transport offering that is available to them.
And you've talked about wanting to work collaboratively. Yeah, at our meeting last week, Karen McGill said to us that they attended a meeting on the 14th of April, where that was the first that they had been presented with the guidance, where they learned that Minister Mallon had agreed a new process. She says, "We were not consulted on it, nor were we party to that new process. It is a done deal." And obviously the draft guidance reflects that new process. Is that the case?
I do think that there was engagement with the industry. So there was engagement with the industry throughout from 2018 and throughout 2018 and 2019 before the new guidance was issued. My understanding is that it was presented to them in summer 2020 as well, and that they did have initial sight of that. I do, however, realise that the industry weren't happy with that meeting in April. I wasn't in attendance at that meeting, but I have subsequently met with Karen, and we have agreed that as we move forward, we will do so very much on a collaborative basis, and we intend to do these guidelines in a co-production way. But I have to say that some of the things within the guidelines are set out in legislation. There is a process which has been put in place, and it largely reflects the JR application that went through the courts was going to be considered. So there are some things where I think what we have done is to improve the process, and I would be reluctant to go back on that. So if you think about, for example, the determination panel, so as opposed to one person making the decision on an application, there are now 3 people who have a level of independence and can analyse and scrutinise the information in much more detail. I think that's a good thing to do, and I would like to have the conversation again with Karen. And if the committee feel that isn't appropriate, I think it is the best way of doing this. It's the best way of making sure that there is a transparent process in place, and I would be keen to continue with that. Where there may be some opportunities for the process to be refined would be around, so for example, the consultation exercise. But I would be, one of the things that we did whenever we were looking at the process was actually go back out to the consultees and say, in order to properly assess this, how much time do you need? And the time that they had been given previously was actually quite tight. So I think we have better reflected what is needed. And some of these applications are coming in are very significant, and they require a lot of scrutiny. And I think the process that we now are considering is much more balanced, and actually is a better outcome for the industry.
Okay, and I appreciate that, and I suppose there will be lessons that will be learned throughout this process, but I suppose what I would urge is that there is better collaboration between yourselves and the sector. There aren't a huge number of them. They are keen to deliver a service, and a lot of that will be at their own sort of financial risk. as well. And I do appreciate the terms of the agreement that you have with TransLink and so on as well. But I suppose I would urge sort of going forward that this committee essentially doesn't then become having to facilitate a discussion between the department and the sector, and that should be happening naturally.
Yeah, and Chair, I very much I couldn't agree with you more, and I would very much like to enter into that agreement with them and to be able to go forward with the industry in a collaborative way. You're aware yourself that I haven't been in this post very long, and I'm still working to build up relationships with the industry. Working in a COVID scenario where we can't actually get together into a room makes those things more difficult, but it is a priority for me to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Deputy Chair, do you have
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jackie, for your presentation. Can you expand on the sixth criterion or the key recommendations when considering the commercial bus service permits? I think it's such other matters that may be presented or prescribed.
Sorry, could you just repeat that for me?
Sorry, I'm looking you to expand on the sixth key recommendation. Sorry, I just lost it here myself. Key considerations in relation to the sixth criterion that yourself don't note it down there. It comes under F, such other matters as may be prescribed. Could you expand a wee bit on that for us, please?
So whenever we're looking at applications, we will look at any issues which are significant. So the legislation as written in 2011 probably put that in as a catch-all. It does allow us to think about what is going to impact on the sector and allows us to bring in current factors. So, for example, you may be thinking about a COVID scenario, you may be thinking about school children and the need for that service, and you may be thinking about the financial implications on other operators within the network. And I just want to be clear that just doesn't apply to TransLink, and that there may be other operators on a route, and we have to take their considerations into account as well.
Okay, thank you. The six listed key recommendations there, do they all carry equal weighting, or is it a case of you don't qualify on one, you're out, or is there a veto situation on that?
There wouldn't be a veto situation, and again, this goes back to the comment I was making to the chair about the fact that there is a panel. So if you think about an interview situation where you're being interviewed, and having a panel of 3 people brings a level of consistency and a level of critical challenge between that panel. And that's what the panel in this case does as well. So while one person may have a view, the panel actually levels that out and makes sure that there is good consideration and a robust discussion on those.
Okay, thank you. How much of an increase to time required to progress applications has the new process estimated to have contributed?
So it has. Now I would have to say it is significantly more, but that has. So what we have tried to do in the process, as we've set down in the guidelines, is to put out the maximum time. So at probably every stage there is potential for that to be reduced. One of the key things that I would actually like to focus on, and obviously at the moment the focus has to be on getting the guidelines out, but the next bit that I would like to do is to actually look at the application form, because quite often we get an application form in which isn't complete, and we have to go back and forward to the applicant to get more information. That increases the time period in order to process that. So I would like to have a look at that application and see, is there something that we can do so that it is more easily understood, better understood, and that we get the information then that we require the first time, and that would reduce the time frame as well. The time frame for the consultation exercise, I don't think there's an awful lot we're going to be able to do about it, and that goes back to the comment I made about the Consumer Council. So what happens is that the applicant will have an opportunity to look at the information which is going out to consultees. That then goes out, the consultees have an opportunity to respond to it and to bring in evidence. That evidence then goes back out to Consumer Council to help inform their decision making. So that is a fairly lengthy process if it is a controversial or significant application. And the other bit that has added a bit of time is in relation to the determination panel. So the determination panel is made up from fairly high level civil servants, trying to get through them and to get time frame in their diary isn't always the easiest, but we do our best to do that and to put that in place as quickly as we can. But we also need to make sure that they have sufficient time to get the evidence packed to them and to have consideration of that. So while there is an increased time frame, there are opportunities to reduce it. And I think the fact that there is the increased time frame is a balance between having something which is very quick and having a process which is robust and transparent.
Okay, thank you. It just concerns me that the news of the issues relating to taxi drivers in recent days isn't good due to probably different systems and whatnot and stuff, and people walking away from it. I'd just be worried that the bus industry goes down the same road, you know. It's just that worry that I have, and I would encourage you to try and do your best to really try and facilitate, you know. My last question, sorry.
Sorry, as I've already said to the chair, you know, I really want to engage with the industry going forward, and where we can facilitate, we will, but it has to be within the legislation and the remit that we have available to us.
Okay, and finally, how regularly does the Bus Operator Forum meet, and in what format?
So the Bus Operator Forum is chaired by Stuart. I think Stuart will correct me on this one. I think it meets quarterly, Stuart.
That's the intention. Yeah, we met a lot more frequently last summer, especially due to COVID, just to keep up to date with the operators. The intention is at minimum to meet quarterly. So this year we actually met in February, then we met in April, as you're aware. And the intention was to try and get another meeting in, at some point over the summer, and then another meeting in September on the sort of the 1 year before PSVR exemptions kick in.
And is that done by a Zoom at the minute, or is there actual face-to-face meetings? Or
it's still unfortunately by Zoom, but we will attempt to go back to face-to-face meetings as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you. And just to follow on from David's point, Jackie, just on that Bus Operator Forum, is that the overarching organisations, isn't that, or is that individual operators that's on that forum?
So again, Stuart will come in with the detail of who attends that, but Bus and Coach and I are there, who are both the umbrella organiser, but we also have operators too. Stuart, do you want to list those who are invited?
Yeah, that's correct. We send the invitation out to Bus and Coach NI and also to Coach Operators NI, and we invite along every single operator who holds a permit. And more recently, with the draft guidelines, we extended that out to operators who had an active application. So not permit holders yet, but they had an application because we wanted to hear their views on the process as well. There's an open invitation. We advise Bus and Coach NI and Coach Operators NI if there's anyone they know of who wants to come along and learn more about the bus permit system. They're more than welcome to come along, but we don't openly invite all 200 operators.
Okay, thank you. And David has already asked a few of my other questions. I think he's actually seen my sheet here. That said, I want to give a sort of an example, Jackie, of an operator. Let's say they're running they've got a permit to run, say, a 5 p.m. for argument's sake from Belfast to Londonderry, and then that has to be renewed. Correct me at any time if I'm wrong. That has to be renewed every 3 years. But in the meantime, TransLink runs a 5 p.m. So what happens whenever that private operator wants to renew his or her permit, considering TransLink has then took over that 5 p.m, and can they take over that 5 p.m? So how does that process work? The private operator has got the permit, TransLink comes along, ultimately steals his commuters. How does that process work, and how does then both things tie together?
Okay, well, I wouldn't like to think that TransLink were stealing commuters off routes, and I'm not sure that that would happen in practice. But if I just maybe go back to what TransLink can do, so you'll be aware that TransLink operate under a PSA with the department. Within that PSA, they have flexibility to make temporary or permanent changes to the network. So temporary changes can be things like timetable or route change in the event of essential maintenance, civil unrest, holiday season timetables, those sort of things that you would expect. In relation to permanent changes, the overall network is divided into districts. So there are 3 metro districts, just for example. And for permanent changes that constitute over 3% of the scheduled mileage per district per month, TransLink need approval from the department before the change is made. For permanent changes that constitute no more than 3% of the scheduled mileage, TransLink notify the department as part of the normal reporting process. These arrangements allow TransLink to manage the network on behalf of the department and to respond appropriately to unforeseen events and seasonal variations in demand. And they also allow them to make adjustments to the services, routes or timetables where passenger demand is sufficient or where there is an issue. And that was one that particularly came to mind over COVID. So sometimes additional buses were put on, especially as we started to move out of restrictions and to make sure that there was maintaining of social distancing. But we need to ensure there is a dynamic, sustainable network which responds to the changing needs. So under Regulation 1370, which is what the PSA is established under, the authority grants exclusive rights to the operator to discharge the public service obligations. But within the PSA, TransLink have exclusive rights to deliver the service set out in the PSA as per the timetable. They don't have exclusive rights to a route in themselves. So if they came forward with a route, as you have set out, where they're actually duplicating a route already put in place, then I think that the department would be looking to challenge that. One of the things that we are starting to look to, or we're very much looking to, not just starting, is the PSA and the review of that, because the current one expires in March 2022. So we're currently in the process of doing that. I think we wrote to the committee in the middle of March to alert you to it. So the new PSA will be for a period of 5 years with an option for a 2-year extension. And under that PSA, TransLink will be required to deliver the current network of services in Northern Ireland as well as the cross-border services. The new PSA will include new performance framework which set targets for TransLink and will be reviewed annually. And contract management arrangements will be reviewed as part of this review. Where necessary, they're going to be strengthened to provide required assurance and to enable robust monitoring and oversight of performance and of route management. So I don't know if that helps or not.
No, fair enough. Thank you. So is the private operator at a disadvantage whenever he or she goes to do a renewal in 3 years if TransLink have come in closer to the 30-minute rule, which I'm not an expert on, but are they at a disadvantage then, considering they were doing the route? TransLink may have moved something which they're possibly entitled to do. Are they at a disadvantage?
I would say the private operator coming through with the renewal is at an advantage rather than a disadvantage, because that route is already in place. They have already proven demand for the route and the service.
Okay.
It's hard for me to say, if I was faced with that example, but at the moment I haven't been faced with it. But I think on a renewal basis, the operator will be the person who has the advantage, the private operator.
Okay, thank you. And one just quick final question on the guidelines. Are they in draft or not? I'm a bit confused. Are they in draft guidelines at the minute? Are they actual guidelines?
So they are guidelines. No. So yeah, I just want to be clear on this one. So the process was amended. The process as amended was approved by the department. I know there is a debate on whether the industry was consulted. The department would say that they were, and we have notes of meetings where that process change was discussed. The new process was approved by the department in 2019. and approved by the Minister following the restoration of the Assembly. And it was at that stage when the Minister agreed that in certain cases applications would be moved to her. The guidelines that are being drafted are very much in draft, and what went out to the industry in March this year was a draft. Following the meeting, following the sending out of the information in March and the meeting which happened in April, we as officials are very aware that industry aren't happy with the guidelines. We are starting to work with them, hopefully in a co-production type way, but I would just like to say that the process currently has been agreed. I think it is in line with the JR application which was taken through, and I think it would be difficult to roll back on some of those changes because I do think that they are a more robust way of making decisions. However, where there is an opportunity to reflect and to amend, tweak the process, we will do that if we can. But in relation to the guidelines document itself, it is very much in draft and we will work with the industry. So there was a couple of things. So for example, and this is probably a fairly minor example, but one of the things that the industry has said to us is that in relation to what evidence they have to provide, the guidance document doesn't give sufficient detail. Now, I'm a bit reluctant to go down the route of setting that out in guidelines because I don't want it to be seen as a definitive list of what example or what evidence is required because every application will be different. But I do intend to work with the industry to see if we can come up with examples which will help them. And again, it's about, these guidelines documents are for the industry and for the department in order to make this process as easy as we all can. And it's been a very difficult journey, I have to say. But where we can, we will make this better, hopefully going forward.
Thank you, Jackie. Stuart.
Okay, thank you. I have 6 members who have indicated, and we're running really short of time. There may be a little bit of leeway for us before we have to leave the room, but can I just let members make them aware that we are under pressure? And I'll call Ms. Kimmins first of all, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Jackie. I'll keep it brief because some of what I was going to ask has been covered. And I suppose really want to reiterate the point that, from our meeting with the operators last week, it's quite contrary to what we're hearing this morning, and they certainly feel that they're being ill-treated by the department, and they feel that it's like they're trying to be locked out of the sector rather than at an advantage. Particularly around, Jackie, you mentioned there that you were under the impression that there had been engagement. They've said very clearly that there was little to no engagement with them, and they said that they felt there was a lack of proper consultation in relation to this. So I suppose I had planned to ask whether, why there was no engagement, but obviously you're saying that there was as far back as last year, and I think that's something we do need clarified before, in terms of what engagement there was before draft changes were made, because they're certainly saying that, that wasn't the case, and that they didn't hear anything about the change in guidance until April, when they were sent copies of the draft. And I suppose just in relation to that, then the only question I wanted to ask was around that, was just why was the change so suddenly? What would be the explanation for that?
So, and again, I'm not going to, I think it's very clear there is a difference in interpretation between the industry and the department and what engagement happened. But in relation to the fact that the guidelines and the new process were just introduced in March and April into the system, I think we have to recognise that the first application through this process was at the end of 2019. There have been 12 applications through this process already. So this is not something which is brand new to anybody. But look, we will, I'm not going to get into he said, she said, and anything. I think we will take back, if the engagement was not to the extent that the industry would have liked, then we will take that on board. and we will make sure going forward that any consultation is more formal and more robust and extensive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be helpful, you know, especially going forward. And, you know, as you know yourself, over the last number of months, particularly around COVID support and all of that as well, there have been other issues too. And engagement was one of the issues that has been highlighted with us repeatedly. So if we can do all we can to improve that, I think that would certainly help. The only other question, just in relation to the 30-minute rule, I know Mr. Buchanan talked about this as well. I mean, can I ask then why the department did feel it was necessary to seek clarification of the 30-minute rule? Because again, the sector described this as almost bringing the shutters down on any express service permits being awarded in future. So I know you said there you think that it's more of an advantage, but just to get
where I was talking about it being an advantage, I think it is an advantage to a sitting tenant over to somebody coming in for a renewal than it is over somebody trying to apply, whether that's Translink or anyone else, to run the same service. In relation to the 30-minute rule, there was a bit of ambiguity around whether that is for all services or whether you take regular stopping services as one category and apply the 30-minute rule, or whether express services, and express services separately, or whether the two are together. Now, the review that we're taking forward, this goes back to my lack of historical knowledge in this work area. And I would like to go back to basics and make sure that we're doing what we intend to do. But the 30-minute rule is designed to protect people and to make sure that whoever is currently working on that route is not disadvantaged by somebody new coming in. What I want to do by way of the review is to go back, make sure that we're applying that regularly, and that there is no ambiguity in the approach. Up until now, there appears to have been a little bit of ambiguity in whether the 30-minute rule applies to all services or whether you take it by category and apply it. What I want to do is have a definitive statement. I do want to work through with the industry on this. We're fairly well at the stage where probably at their next meeting we'll have a discussion on this. I also have asked for the Consumer Council's view on it in order to make sure that we take that on board, because again it goes back to some of the comments I made to the chair at the beginning. The passengers are the important people in this. It's to make sure that we have a good service provision for them. So the 30-minute rule review will just provide clarity on that. But I would also say the 30-minute rule is not a legislative requirement, and there has always been the idea that it could be set aside. So whenever a panel is looking at an application, they may choose to set aside the 30-minute rule, whether they think it needs to apply or not. They can actually choose to set it aside if they think, for example, that there is sufficient evidence of demand for the service. So if coming out of Newry, I'll use Newry as an example, they thought that the current service provision was insufficient, and you had passengers not being picked up, then maybe that 30-minute rule can be set aside, and you can allow another operator to come in 15 minutes difference, as opposed to making sure it's more than half an hour. So I suppose the current review is really to provide clarity and to make sure there is no ambiguity going forward.
Okay, well, I think, as you said there, with engagement with the sector, I think that's something that will need to be sort of nailed down and people have a proper understanding, because certainly the sense we were getting from the operators was that it was any attempt to reinterpret the 30-minute rule would do the opposite of what's currently in place and prevent regular stop and service and express service coexisting along a shared or partially shared route. So, I think that is a very important one. So if there's good engagement and the sector are able to get their views across and we can get some of that resolved, I think that would be very helpful. But Chair, I'm conscious there's other people looking to come in, so I'll leave it at that. But thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Ms. Kimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jackie and Stuart. Jackie, just following on from a colleague, clearly the industry feel that they have been badly treated in relation to this. Comments like obstructive and also raise barriers for the industry in terms of being part of the public transport network. I mean, we received that commentary last week. So my first question to you, I have 3 specific questions. Why did the department feel the need to change the determination process, and at what level was that taken?
Okay, so the determination process was changed following a judicial review application. So as part of that judicial review, it was stated that there was insufficient analysis and consideration. So in order to try and ensure that that didn't happen going forward, a determination panel was introduced. This makes it, as I've already stated, a more robust process. It makes sure that we have 3 people making that decision. And those 3 people meet. I've only been on 1 determination panel so far, but those 3 people meet as far as possible in a room, and that allows a really good flow of information. So all the evidence that is provided can be discussed. The evidence of specific interests or the advice from specialists, for example, the economists and the transport planners, can be taken into consideration and have a fairly good and robust consideration around that. I think moving forward that is a more it's a better, more transparent process than having an individual making those decisions. And I'm not in any way undermining Stuart, because previously it would have been his role to make those determinations, but I think having 1 person making them as opposed to having 3, the 3-person panel is going to be a more robust process. The decision on that was the process changes were recommended by the department for what were approved at PermSec level.
Right, and just in terms of the actual guidelines itself, the industry is saying there's 8 specific guidelines that essentially turns the industry on its head and presents barriers. So in terms of the guidelines, and I know you're saying there you're going to consult with the industry, what's the scope for looking at those guidelines and working with the industry to try and open that up a bit to make it more accessible for the industry?
So I want to break this down into 3 pieces. Okay, so there are parts of the guidelines which are legislative based. The only way that we can change those is by putting through an amendment to the 2011 Act. So to me, that's, that we would need a very good evidence base to start to go down that process. There are parts of the process which have been approved at permanent secretary and ministerial level, and while they are still open for discussion, again, I would want a fairly robust consideration around what any changes in relation to that might be. And at the moment, I would still be of the view that the changes that were made as part of that process just improve the system. Albeit that there is a bigger time frame, I do think that they improve the system. Then within the guidelines, there are pieces of it which are probably open to a bit more discussion. So there is still scope there. There are a couple of things which weren't included in the draft guidelines in March, and that's because they're still with the department for consideration. So those would be around station access and journey planner. And we are currently actively working on those 2 issues, and we'll continue to engage with the industry going forward to see how best we can position that.
Just a final point, and you may or may not be able to respond to this, but in relation to the Hannon's case, and it's well rehearsed, we've had a number of briefings on it. In terms of one of our cases where you had said they did not supply, enough, sufficient evidence, they challenged that. Would you like to comment on exactly what was the evidence they were supposed to provide, or any commentary around that, please?
Okay, so I'm going to deplete on this one. So Hannons were informed on the 30th of March of the decision. So that was in relation to 6 applications, and I'm assuming it's one of those that you're referring to.
Yeah.
The decision was made in line with the legislation on which all permit applications are based. we are still within the time frame for a judicial review against those applications, and that time frame extends, I think, until the 30th of June. And on that basis, I don't think it's appropriate for me to enter into a conversation at this time.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, but it's just a point I had to raise with you. Just a final point. Jackie, we have to get to this point where, because the industry feel that the department keeps moving the goalposts. So, I mean, we need to ensure that the consultations that continue from now, will continue, and, like I say, make it more accessible for them, for the industry, and welcome them into the transport industry. Okay, but thank you very much for your answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Miss Anderson.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Chair. And look, Jackie, I appreciate what you said this morning about valuing the industry, but the private bus and coach operators, they don't feel valued. They feel they face obstacles in the department, and that, for instance, when they saw the documents given to the Minister about the change in the payment process, you know, the reps in the sector described this as wholly unfair. Because it didn't mention their opposition, which was clearly expressed to the department from the sector. So, Jackie, you have to take on board, they don't feel valued. They feel ignored. And so, whilst they probably appreciate your comments this morning, they don't want tea and sympathy. And so the question that they need answered, why, if the department values the consultation with the sector, did it not reflect clearly expressed views from the sector when the documentation was given to the Minister about change in the payment process?
Okay, and thanks for that question. What I would say is that my understanding is that that submission to the Minister was based on the best evidence. It was before my time within this post. So I don't want to second guess the quality of that, but we will continue to look at that. I think probably more importantly than looking back is the idea that we do look forward. I've already said today that, you know, I really do want to work with the industry in a co-production type way. I think if we start to look at that and to look at how we start to build relationships, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I totally understand the industry's perspective on where the relationship is at the moment. And all I can say is that I'm going to work very hard to improve that and to let's get up the hill on it.
Well, I would probably recommend, Jackie, then that you don't start off where someone else left on with this notion of whatever and how you define best evidence, because best evidence is not co-design, and co-design is what we're hearing from executive ministers in relation to how they're going to take things forward. You can't ignore what someone is saying to you and the industry is saying to you because it's not regarded as best evidence. And so I would just appreciate what you're saying, that you want to have that working relationship with them. So do we. Because it's not good. It's not good for the public to be hearing that there is a sector that is valued by all of us, appreciated by many who have used, if not all, of their customers, and that they don't feel that they're having that best relationship with the department. So good luck going forward with that, and hopefully we'll not have to hear many more complaints from the department or from the sector as a result of your own intervention with them. Jackie, can I ask you about the journey planner? Because in your briefing you stated it was no longer viable due to increased levels of information. Now, surely it's not that complex to arrange so that the public is aware of the extent of the service that is available. And I'm talking primarily for myself in terms of our own experience here in this constituency of the Derry Airporter, really a valued service in this city, not just in the city, but across the northwest. But it's been trying to get on the journey planner for years. And they're finding that very frustrating, and so are we, the customers who use that service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just in relation to Journey Planner, so the service, Journey Planner was opened up to operators in, I think it was 2012, and that was on a pilot basis. At that stage, only one operator took it up, and they were included on Journey Planner. the journey planner has changed during that period of time. And if you think even about the technology that has happened over the technology changes that have happened over the last 9 years, they have been fairly significant, and how we access information has changed. So the information that is contained on Journey Planner needs to be quite detailed. There was some changes to the system, and as a result, the operator who had been on from 2012, their information was missed. And the level of detail that is currently required was not provided by the operator to TransLink. Now, I am aware that TransLink are engaging actively. I mean, literally this week, they are engaging with that operator, and that operator will come back onto Journey Planner whenever they have their post-COVID scheduling sorted. In relation to Airporter, that's a slightly different issue because it operates, it's not a public transport, so it operates from a place to an airport and you have to book it in advance, so it's slightly different. So in order to try and get around that, TransLink are working with the Airporter at the minute, and what they're proposing to do is actually put a link on the Journey Planner. So the Journey Planner won't reflect the Airporter journeys, but it will give a link, and that link will take you to the Airporter, and you'll be able to pick up their journey times there and make your booking. Now, one of the things that I want to think about going forward is actually what is best, and again, I keep coming back to what is best for our passengers and the people who are using this service. And we should have something which is fairly joined up. But TransLink are providing services, but are also operating Journey Planner. Whenever they do that, there is a potentially data protection issues in there. There are also, and I'm going to get into this stage where I don't know what I'm talking about, but do you know, whenever you apply, you try and buy a new pair of shoes, and all of a sudden you're getting all these ads on your system. That's because of information and the fact that people can access your journey and what you have looked at. It's the same with Journey Planner. So TransLink would have access to the number of clicks and who people have, what journeys people have looked for. So is that appropriate for them to have access to that information for private operators? We need to bottom that out. We need to think about how best to go forward with this. But it is something we're under active consideration with TransLink on.
Well, I'm glad to hear that TransLink is engaging with Derry Airporter on this. I appreciate the importance of data protection, but I also know too, as passengers, you don't want to go to a link, they have to go to another link to get access to the information. So anything that can be done to join that up, I think would be appreciated, particularly for my constituents who need the Airporter to get to the airports in Belfast, because there are no other service really doing that. So one last thing, can I ask you, I'm not sure if you are giving this any attention with your other colleagues in other divisions in the department, but when we're talking about post-recovery, and we're talking about, for instance, one of the members had made reference to the taxi industry and the many taxi drivers that have left that industry, and they don't want the same thing happening to private bus and coach operators. But is there any consideration given to a temporary postponement of the entry test for taxi drivers to get them back into the industry, like the way it was in 2016 before the entry test came into existence? And it's only to try to assist the industry as part of the post-COVID recovery, given that there is such a lack of taxi drivers now out there, and it can take 3 to 6 months to do the theory test, and it would only be a proposal around the temporary postponement of it to help them deal with the pressures that they are currently under.
To be perfectly frank with you, that's not something that I would have any knowledge of at all, and I would be reluctant to try and answer it. We'll maybe send something back to the committee.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Chair.
We are running short of time. Mr. Muir?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Jackie. It's appreciated. and a lot of my questions have been answered. Also, the paper you provided for this committee meeting was very informative, so I appreciate that. I would, however, have to echo the comments from some members about the frustration which was expressed. No doubt you saw the Hansard or the proceedings last week from the operators. I think there was I think it would be fair to describe that people were feeling that they weren't getting a level playing field and a fair crack at the whip, really, and that's something that can be, it obviously affects them commercially in the environment that they're in, but it's also, it's an issue of fairness, really. Just two things. One is around the shared facilities regulations, and if there's any plans or any timescales for introduction of those. And then the other one, I'm conscious of time, so it's just two questions. I have another issue for AOB if I get a chance, Chair, but is about the 30-minute rule, and it's just the timescales for the engagement and consultation around that, because to me, obviously, there was a range of issues last week, but one of the issues was around the 30-minute rule, and particularly around the operation of express coach services, and they felt that that was one of the key impediments in terms of being able to get that fair chance to operate. So hopefully that's two issues.
Okay, so from the point of view, I'll take the last one first. So from the point of view of the 30-minute rule, I would be hopeful and just very conscious of the fact that I'm the person holding this up at the minute, and there has been work done and it's sitting on my desk. But I would be very hopeful within the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks to be in a position to try and bottom that out with the industry. So please don't hold me to that 4 to 6 weeks if it slips to 7, but it's that sort of time frame rather than the autumn, if that's helpful.
And shared facilities?
In relation to the shared facilities then, shared facilities are really about station access and where operators would share the facilities with TransLink. So there have been 2 requests for shared facility access, as far as I'm aware. One of the services requested hasn't actually commenced yet, and the other has been allowed, and TransLink do allow it. In relation to, so within the PSA between the department and TransLink, TransLink will look at requests from third-party access in good faith. All right, so that's our underlying principle on this. In doing so, however, they have to look at health and safety and safe operating practices. And I'm sure you would agree with me that that's pretty fundamental to any public transport station. So we're currently working on the new PSA within TransLink or with TransLink, and we're going to look at the approach to station access going forward, and whether that can be extended out. One of the things that I have been talking to TransLink about is in relation to the new transport hub, for example. So the current bus station at Great Victoria Street, I think, has 18 parking bays on it. The new one has, just as she checks her notes, I think 26. So we're going up to 26. And that will obviously present opportunities for further development and potentially for private operators. So it's something to look at going forward. In relation to, you specifically asked about the shared services regulations. We can, under the 2011 Act, bring in regulations to actually require this to be done, whether it makes any difference or not, because there will still be the fundamental need to look at the operating and the health and safety issues. But we could, so it is something that we could do. It was ready to go during the last mandate before the Assembly stopped in, 2017? And during this mandate, obviously the legislative focus has been around Brexit and trying to make sure that our legislative programme in relation to that was robust. So it wasn't taken through. We could look at it in the future. I suppose I would be more inclined to think about how we can do this in a more collaborative way with TransLink and the operators being able to collaborate and having a fairly good relationship. And having discussed this with TransLink, I think that's probably where I would prefer to go in the short term.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. And as I said, a lot of my questions were already asked, and I do think this is a very important issue, and it's not to overlook the import of it, but I'm also aware of time and the chair, they're being thrown out of the room in Parliament buildings. So thank you for your answers, but this is an important issue.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beggs?
Hello, I want to go back to Journey Planner again. And the language being used is that people haven't been included because they haven't provided the increased level of information and data. I've ever thought in terms of practically being listed in Journey Planner, and bearing in mind this is a public service paid for by the public. Millions of pounds, literally almost £1 million has been spent in developing this website, plus all the additional money prior to that. What information has been missed other than the time of the bus service and where it's arriving? Can you tell me what additional information is needed? Are barriers being put up, I have to say?
No, I don't. I genuinely don't think the barriers are being put up. And I think my earlier comments in relation to how TransLink are facilitating the operator who was previously included, and they're going to get them back on board. And so at the moment, my understanding is that they're just waiting for that operator to finalise their post-COVID scheduling. And when that's done, that they will be back on board. In relation to Airporter, it is slightly different because it's not a passenger service. So you have to pre-book Airporter. You can't just, rock up at a stop and know that the bus is going to stop for you, which is really what Journey Planner is about. So that needs to be taken through slightly differently, but TransLink are trying to facilitate that. That is the only two requests that I'm aware of for access to Journey Planner. But going forward, I would like to think about, it goes back to what is the best thing to do for our passengers, whether Journey Planner is the right way to do it. But at the moment, we are with a system that TransLink runs as an operator, so they're operating the system, but they're also a public transport operator.
You've said that the original pilot applicant was removed because there's an increased level of information was required for Journey Planner. Can you come back to the committee and tell us what the additional increased information was? Because I failed to understand that one.
But my understanding is that was in relation to a systems update. So the system was updated and the information that was currently held was insufficient. At the beginning, nobody realised that it had been dropped off. And once that happened, then there was the request for the increased information to try and get them back on board.
Can I advise, I'm disappointed because I got an answer to a recent question to the Minister, and there's no reference to a failure in a system update or failure with the Journey Planner system. It was almost implying that there's a lack of information from the applicant. So I think it's very disappointing to the Minister.
Well, what I'll do, Mr. Beggs, is come back and clarify that, because it's a difficult one, and it's an IT system, and my IT knowledge is not that up to date, but I will come back and clarify that for you.
Okay. Then, in terms of others are saying access to public bus stations, again, a service for the public, paid for by the public. Certainly, there is a perception that private coach operators must drop their carrying public off in the street, even at quiet times when there is no health and safety risks. So, how are you going to ensure that perception does not continue?
So I will continue to work with TransLink on that. If we feel that there is that perception, even, then maybe the shared facilities regulations is the way to go. And I will look at that going forward. And it's one of the things that I will discuss with operators.
Again, on the 30-minute rule, then, concern was given to us about how purchasing a significant coach was a long-term investment, and yet the permit is only for 3 years, and they are coming back, and again, their understanding is they're applying and could lose their permit after that 3 years, particularly if TransLink have introduced new services in the meantime who have In some instances, when applications have come in, before those determinations are made, TransLink introduces new services almost to create a difficulty for those services. So how are we going to ensure that there is innovation going forward and that entrepreneurial spirit that the private sector does bring to respond to market needs, to the customers' needs, is continued, and that they are not pushed out when TransLink perhaps sees competition and moves in?
Yeah, and again, this goes back to one of the earlier questions, and I do feel that the incumbent the incumbent operator does have an advantage whenever it comes to renewal. The 3-year renewal period is set in legislation, so there's very little really we can do about that in the short term going forward, short of taking through an amendment to the primary legislation. But whenever a renewal application comes in, it doesn't go to a determination panel, so the information needs to be considered. It still goes out to the consultees. Again, that's required by the legislation, and the decision is made by the head of branch. In most cases, and I'm trying to think of an example that wouldn't be covered, but in most cases, I would have thought that if the service provision was sufficient, if the passenger numbers were sufficient for the operator to want a renewal, then I can see very few issues around that renewal being allowed, unless there was other issues that had come to light. I cannot see, and I've already talked about the PSA with TransLink. We will be looking to make sure that there is no, and you have quoted what may or may not happen with TransLink introducing new services. Unless I have specifics around that, I really couldn't even think about starting to comment on it. But we would have provision in order to make sure that TransLink only operates services within the PSA, and that PSA routes are only extended with the approval of the department.
In terms of your process of renewal, you've introduced a new process for initial application. Would you not consider introducing a new processes for renewal, given that individuals have been through that detailed process initially? They've obviously proven and developed the service. And why are we making such a bureaucratic service for what you're saying should be virtually automatic, except if they're not perhaps providing the level of service that one would expect? So why do you not have a different service for renewal?
So at the moment, there are things that a renewal application still requires, and that includes the consultation phase. So if we get a renewal application, we must go out to consultees on it, and it's the same list of consultees as for new applications. That's set in legislation. There is nothing that we can do about it short of changing the legislation. And I think there are good reasons why we should continue to go out to consultation on that. So, for example, one of our consultations would be with PSNI. So if they have identified any issues with that service, I think it's only fair that the application and the renewal process is alerted to that. It is a more streamlined system, and we will endeavour to make sure within the guidelines. So Stuart and I have been having a conversation about what the guidelines might look like going forward, and we're actually thinking about changing it putting in 3 sections. So one will be a renewal section, one will be a first application system, and a separate section then to look at where people request a slight amendment to their permit. So it's not a new application, but maybe it's a slight change of time or whatever, and that we will have that very clearly set out to make sure that it's open and transparent to everybody.
I hope it'll be a bureaucratic light. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mrs. Kelly. Sorry, we can't hear you, Dolores.
Apologies, Chair, and if I've missed the platitudes, I want to wish you well in your new post, and I've enjoyed working with you in your current role as Chair of Infrastructure Committee, so I look forward to seeing my constituency sooner rather than later, I hope. But the report before us and the answers by the Department has actually been very helpful, and I'll not repeat the questions others have raised, but Jackie, you did say in your in your preamble that the gaps in the network, is where you want the private sector to fill, but yet, and I have to agree with other members, particularly Roy, when and Martina said that that's not how the operators express themselves as being valued, and I have to say we value the public sector provision of transport, but in the forthcoming PSA review, what will the terms of reference be for that? What will be the lessons learned over the last X number of years, and how will you consult, if you will consult, with the private sector as well as service users in the delivery of that? And how do you then set the standards that we have here against other jurisdictions in terms of provision of public sector transport networks?
Okay, so the PSA, as I've already said, is up for renewal this year, and the team is working very hard with TransLink to look at that. That is covered in Regulation 1370, and we will need to make sure that that Regulation 1370 is applied. The PSA will give TransLink exclusive rights to deliver services that are set out in the PSA as per the timetable. They don't have exclusive rights to the routes themselves. We are in a different situation here than we are in other jurisdictions across these islands. It is different here, for example, the NTA in Ireland and the service provision in GB. We will look to see what we can learn by best practice in relation to that. But it is different, and they would not have PSAs the same way that we would with the operators. So it is a case of balancing those. One of the things that I would say is that even if you look at information which the department has very recently published, we are looking towards making sure that the passenger needs are fully met, and that includes in relation to the likes of demand responsive services. So that's something I think going forward with our transport plans as well that we will be looking to do and to encourage. And I think we will continue to encourage our operators, our private operators, to help us to deliver, to make sure that all passengers and all citizens across Northern Ireland have access to public transport, because that's the way to go. And eventually this goes back to climate change and our responsibilities in relation to that, and to reduce use of cars.
Chair, will there be a cost-benefit analysis in relation to that?
Sorry?
A cost-benefit analysis, which will look comparable across jurisdictions, and also in terms of the management costs and whether or not those are value for money.
That would be a fairly wide piece of review. Now, the PSA will look at value for money and efficiency savings, and as part of that, we will be benchmarking TransLink against other comparable as we can find operators. So that piece of work will be done.
Sure, I think that's something we'll probably be coming back to as a committee at some further point.
Okay, can I just thank you both for your time this morning. We did overrun our time quite considerably, and I think we're quite confident that the committee will be returning to this again. So thank you, Jackie and Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, can I very quickly draw your attention then to the forward work programme, page 135, and just draw your attention to the fact, reflecting on our conversation earlier, that there will be 2 briefings from DVA at next week's meeting, obviously in relation to the PAC report as well. Can I also remind members that tomorrow morning there is an informal meeting via Starleaf at 10 a.m, and I know a number of members have responded to that, so your attendance at that would be very welcome. Members content to note the forward work programme? Okay, moving then to any other business. Mr. Muir, you had indicated that you had something. Okay, so Mr. Muir, Miss Anderson, you're okay. So sorry, just taking her hand down. Mr. Muir, Mr. Boylan, and the Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. You'll probably be aware that recent coverage and obviously reports from operators and from taxi drivers in terms of the issues that they're now experiencing. This good element of this is a hangover from the pandemic, but also it's related to ongoing issues in terms of the industry. And I was going to recommend that we, as a committee, write to the Minister to ask her what plans she has to undertake a review of how the regulation of the industry is undertaken to ensure that we're able to get as many people back and being able to help the local communities as they have been doing throughout the pandemic and before, and also to write to the Economy Minister in terms of what action she's taken, or potentially he from next week, in terms of supporting the industry as one of the key part of our economy, because there is a key issue here in terms of skills shortage, not just within the taxi industry, but also within, for example, logistics, within hospitality, and we do need to respond to this because this issue is going to become acute and it's going to start and affect our recovery from COVID-19. So that's just 2 suggestions from myself.
Okay, members content? Okay, thank you. Mr. Boylan?
Yeah, Chair, thanks, Chair. Chair, just an issue, obviously it's arising from Brexit, but it's in relation to the hauliers. Hauliers are having problems with qualifications as transport managers. Basically, they had a period of time where they could convert their northern qualifications to the south, and now there's a short window of opportunity to do that, and now they've found that they need an address or residency in the south for to do that. So I'm just asking the committee to write to the Minister to see can she intervene, because the hauliers are, some of them are up in arms and they're finding difficulties dealing with that. So I'd send on an email just to clarify the point, but I'm looking support just to write to the Minister to see what she can do, working with her counterpart in the south to address that issue.
Okay, members content? Okay, thank you, Ms.
Thank you. Like Andrew was going to share some issues in relation to the taxi industry, but it sort of was more focused on potentially getting the Chief Executive of DVA here, potentially the Permanent Secretary, regarding the DVA enforcement section, of which there appears to be a number of real problems out there at the minute and sort of breaches of their own potential code of conduct. So I was looking maybe to go further than just write, maybe invite along someone to talk to us about the taxi industry in general and that specifically.
Okay, DVA are here next week to talk about MOTs and driving tests.
Yeah.
So it might be an opportunity maybe to introduce that, but I don't think it would do any harm maybe to write in advance as well, and maybe look at a specific briefing on it, on enforcement, because obviously it's broader reaching than...
Yeah, there's been a number of incidents in court cases over the last 12 months in relation to things which appear to be not correct. Well, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, members content?
Yeah,
okay.
Just further to that, then, Chair, can I wasn't at the start of the meeting, but can I as Vice Chair pay tribute to yourself as Chair and steering us through some of the problems over the last year and keeping us all in line here as committee members. You've done a fairly sterling job in my opinion anyway, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, and can I just thank all members really for their participation really over the last year. It hasn't been easy at times with COVID and so on, but I mean you've all been tremendous in attendance. There haven't really been any issues at all in relation to decorum, which makes chairing a meeting very helpful, but also the participation that you've had. You're all incredibly interested and over the brief, which again makes it very easy then to chair. So I'd like to thank you for that. Obviously we'd like to have been able to have got out on a number of visits. We'd have probably had a tour of Northern Ireland on at this stage in normal times, but hopefully as restrictions ease, that will ease up and you'll get the opportunity to do that. I'd also like to thank Vincent, Ali and Kathy and Johnny and Bill for their support over the last year too, which has made my job easier. So thank you very much, and hopefully you'll make the new chair very welcome.
Yes, I can come in there as well. I never got a chance to come in at the start, but just again to echo the comments of everybody else. I mean, I certainly find you very fair and have worked really, really well with all of us over the last year, particularly as a newish MLA. You know, it certainly helped me in my experience on committee. So just to thank you for all your work and wish you well in your new posts, and hopefully your the incoming chair will pick up where you've left off and continue that trail. So thanks very much for everything.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buchanan.
Yes, I think it'll be probably appropriate if I said something as well. I wasn't going to say anything, but everybody's forced me into it now. No, just to congratulate you and thank you for your efforts and work over this past year, and congratulate you on your new post, and I wish you my personal thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, members, for that. And if you're content, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.